All right, so we're gonna jump real quick to back to last week where we had our group contingency in place. So we designed our group contingency where we want, you guys are probably all on the edge of the seats, you want to know about taking the weekly quizzes. So, being a good, what?
When we talked about it, you said that everyone just had to attempt it.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
that-
Sorry.
Okay.
This is from last year and I didn't update it, but yeah, I should change it for this one. My fault.
She gets an extra credit point.
And I just want to make sure you remember that I was exempt.
Yes, you were exempt.
You did send me all of them, thank you so much. I was like jumping up and down.
So let's take a look at our data. So before we put the group contingency in place, we always want to know our baseline data.
Okay.
Wait a second, that they have sometimes something's wrong because actually I took the quiz, but after I reviewed it last week, everything's wrong.
Yeah. Ah.
Some
For quiz 3.
No, quiz 1 and quiz 2, so I retake it.
Quiz 1 and quiz 2.
I know
gone.
3 was missing.
Yeah.
3 I took care of, but 1 and 2 should
1
have
and
been
2
missing.
is gone, so I retake it. I don't want
It
to
did
go back
reset
to
mine
it.
because it didn't show. I think if we scored
For-
lower
for
than,
3?
maybe, no, for 1 and 2, if we had scored lower than 80, maybe, because I know I had 70 on one of them.
I wonder if it's because I changed the setting that you could take it multiple
It
times.
could be, but I had
Oh,
to
it might
retake
happen.
all of them
Might
after.
Oh, you can only take
Yeah.
3 for the first one. 3 for the test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But did everybody do okay though?
Yeah.
We all did. Then it's a non-issue.
Alright.
Yeah, I should still be able to pull up the old data from your attempts at it.
Okay.
So, I didn't realize that did it for 1 and 2. Okay, so baseline data before, we had 39.4% of the quizzes taken before our group contingency. So, pretty low.
Okay.
All right, so we put our group contingency in place. At 6:30, I checked the quizzes. We were at 90.1%.
Okay.
So just out of whim, I checked again at 6:55, right before class started, and we had. So some people realized in that 25 minutes that they had to at least attempt it. So.
All right.
Yeah. So you guys met it barely. I was sitting in Starbucks at 6:30 thinking, oh, they are going to be so upset. Maybe I should just make it 90%. No, I got to be firm and say, nope, they didn't do it. And then I got here, I was like, I'll just double check one last time, and it was at 100%. So I was like, all right,
There we go.
someone.
High five, everybody. High five.
So,
Whoever did it, thank you. Whoever did it.
so what I will do is I'll post the quizzes for these last 2 chapters if you want to just go through them and take them just for fun.
Okay.
But at the very end of the course, I'll just automatically give everybody 100% on those quizzes. So, but I would still recommend going through and taking them just for the practice of getting to know that chapter well. So,
Extra credit.
not extra credit, no. It's already going in as 100%. That's more than enough extra credit.
Nice job. Nice job.
All right, so we're gonna do an activity tonight.
Okay.
And hopefully my animations are all here. So, okay, good. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Perfect. I don't have to take any data. So, oh man, that should be TWO. I need 2 groups.
Okay.
Data collectors and clients. So, find a partner, decide which one's going to be a data collector, which one's going to be the client.
Oh, you want?
I'm going to send the clients out. Well, first everybody choose your partner.
The groups of 2, not 2 groups.
Okay, you got it.
Not the class in
Right,
half,
But not right.
2 people, yeah.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, so it should say the groups of 2, yeah. So I was hammering this out at Starbucks at the last moment here. So it totally changed up my activity. I didn't like my first activity at all.
Okay.
So, all right, so everybody's got one?
We're even. Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so. You will need to make sure your client is visible That's the one criteria. So
What?
you have to make sure your client is visible. So like, we don't want Myra, working with Sharon.
Okay.
So, because that won't work out. But you could have the other way around. So, all right, so here's what I need to do. So I need our clients, so grab your books, cell phones, whatever will keep you entertained for approximately 5 minutes while I explain to the data collectors what they're doing. And you guys can just go out to that.
Doors.
Okay.
Shut the doors when you leave.
Okay.
Just give me a moment.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I'm gonna need 5 minutes.
And it probably won't take 5 minutes.
Okay.
Now that you guys are so knowledgeable in ABA strategies and data collection and various other things, it'll probably take a minute. But just in case, keep yourselves entertained.
Okay.
Try not to listen.
Close the door.
All right, so I'll grab this started. All right.
Okay, what trick are we gonna play on?
So we get to know
Let's
where
go
we're
home.
leaving, it's there.
Yeah.
First, we'll hand out the informed consent.
So we won't talk to them at all, right?
Right, you're not telling them what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, okay.
So data collectors, here's what we
Okay.
need you guys to do.
Okay.
So for approximately, wow, I have so many grammar errors here. So for approximately the next hour, we're going to collect partial interval data every 5 minutes. And I'm going to set my alarm. It'll be kind of annoying to have it go off every 5 minutes.
Okay.
Or if you guys think you can manage.
No, alarm is.
Okay, I'll set the alarm then.
Yeah.
And I'll just, tap it. So we're going to do partial interval data. Everyone familiar with partial interval data?
If it happens at all.
At all.
Happens at all during those 5 minutes. What we're looking at is the target behavior is every time your client looks at their cell phone, and this is turning it on to check the, messages, the time, emails, whatever, you're going to mark it as a positive response.
So there
Okay?
could be multiple positives in the file.
No, only one.
Only thing that they've done it at least one time during the 5 minutes,
Yep.
it's just one mark, right?
Yep.
So if they just look at it, that doesn't count.
Right,
They have
so
to actually do something.
They'd have to actually do something with
Okay.
it. So yeah, because if it's sitting there and they look, so unless you see like a message pop up or something,
Mhm.
there's some clear reason why they're looking at it.
Did everyone have a cell phone tonight? 'Cause I
Not
forgot
necessarily.
mine.
Well, and that's why I told them to grab their books, cell phones. I'm hoping when they come back, they'll put their cell phone right next to them.
Mm.
So I'm kind of setting them up, hopefully, for that response. So, one thing that you need to be careful about
He
is,
did not grab his cell phone.
that's why I just leave it there.
Ah, just leave it right
So
there.
I've noticed in a lot of our classes, people primarily have their cell phones at least next to them. So, or if your client tends to surf the web during class, something, you could use that as the target
Is there
behavior.
anything else you want us to look at? Because I know he's not gonna.
Right,
He's not
okay.
gonna look at it, he's not gonna do anything with it. Chances of it going off is gonna be like zero.
Yeah, and Jerry, one that you probably won't have very much.
Yeah.
If there's some other behavior that, he pretty much pays attention the whole time.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I'm
yeah.
trying to think of what he might do that would be weird.
So, you may just not have anything and your activity will be slightly boring.
Okay, all right,
So, or if you want to pick somebody else and watch them, that's fine.
okay.
So just don't let them
Yes.
know necessarily. One thing you want to be careful about is reactivity, especially with a partial interval recording, is when they do the behavior, don't mark it down right away. You might want to wait till that 5-minute cue. Otherwise, they'll start noticing their own pattern of, I'm looking at my cell phone, whatever it may be. So, all make sense?
Mhm.
So yeah, you'll need this sheet on the side to keep track
How
of.
many interval, how many times are we doing it?
5 minutes
It's 5-minute intervals.
for an hour?
There's approximately an hour. There's a slide where I say, all right, we're done with our activity and here's what we're doing next. I'm thinking it will probably be around an hour, but we're going to end up taking a percentage. So what percent of the time were they involved in their cell phone? So it doesn't matter.
Anytime they touch, if they just glare, glance at it, then that's not.
Anytime they're basically interacting with it. So if an email pops up or a message, like some people's phones, the message will pop up and they sit there and read it. Like whatever it is that takes their focus off of class
Okay.
and onto their cell phone, that's what you're paying attention to.
Okay,
Make sense?
yeah, no,
So, all right. And obviously they have no idea what we're going to be watching them on. Okay, so with that, I will go grab them. Do you really want to distract them? You can text them during.
Ooh.
Isn't that like?
Setting them up.
Yeah.
But it'll still work for our activity.
Not in the hurry. I knew exactly what you said.
And no reviewing the videotape yet.
Busted.
Alright. For our clients, I apologize for the alarm. So it'll be slightly distracting, but you're just gonna have to deal with it. Okay. So tonight we're talking about self-management, one of my favorite topics. So with self-management in that chapter, they talk about psychological constructs. So these are hypothetical constructs that often are perceived, as characteristics of the individual. So, you often hear this person lacks self-control, or they're feeling depressed, whatever it may be. These are all psychological constructs that, of course, us behavior analysts don't abide by, because they are internal and unobservable, and so we say there's very little to no data we can take on it. However, so what we're interested in is that the behavioral principles can still be associated with some behavior related to those psychological constructs. And with self-management, what we're looking at is changing the behavior even though the psychological construct may exist. So, addiction to cigarettes. Well, I guess that's not so much a psychological construct, that's physiological. But you kind of get the idea is that we're interested in the observable piece of things, even though someone may say, they eat because they're depressed. So.
So that means that like stress eating wouldn't be, is that like a psychological?
That would be that wouldn't be associated with behavioral analysis.
So when we look at the behavior, we just look at them eating, like you're just hungry.
Yes.
We don't say that.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight, is getting people more aware of their own behavior and not crediting, their, let's say, obesity to some construct that I do it because I've been abused as a child or whatever it may be. We're interested in just that behavior. So, all right. So 2 response conceptualizations of self-control. There is this kind of not dispute, but discussion, and we're going to hit it again at the very end, about what exactly the self-management strategies do for the individual, whether it's controlling the response, or it is, whether it's a controlled response or controlling the response. So when someone implements a self-management strategy, are they changing their behavior because they're now aware of their behavior, or has it actually changed their behavior itself? And this will become a lot more clear, I think, at the very last slide when we're really talking about, and you've gone through exactly what all this entails. So, but basically, is it an antecedent intervention, or is it, a consequence intervention? And there's discussion about that. So, all right. So self-management. First of all, the definition. It's the personal application of behavior change tactics that produce a desired change in behavior. So the key piece being here, it's a personal application. So in this case, your client is very aware of what is going on. Whereas some of our response prompts, our chaining, they're not looking at the big picture of everything. They're just focused in that, one little tactic, and they may not even know and have any idea that you're implementing something. Okay, I want to make sure my volume's on here. And it wasn't. Okay. Whereas with self-management, it's very evident and very salient to the individual that you're doing something with them. So there's a continuum of control. So sometimes the individual gets to to control everything. Sometimes it's partially up to the therapist and partially up to the client. The person must act some way to change subsequent behavior. So they're doing something to change their future response. And that's where it gets kind of fuzzy. Is it an antecedent intervention, or have they, self-reinforced themselves enough that now it's considered a principle of behavior? So reasoning to clarify from self-control. So self-control, which is another slide we're going to talk about here shortly, but self-control implies that the ultimate control lies within the person. There is an element of self-control with self-management, but once again, you're looking at how much of the tactic has added to that self-control. All right, 5 minutes. So there's what they call explanatory fiction. Okay. Yeah. So, kind of blanking on what explanatory fiction was. Here's my notes. Yeah, okay. So, yes, that does. There is, I've talked about, there's a mentalistic theory that there's an inner dimension that changes behavior. So I guess the explanatory fiction, it's basically, I guess, talking about the fact that there's the internal things, the constructs that we don't know what's actually going on. But ultimately we think it's the principle, or the intervention that's actually changing that behavior. And it's often used for the ability for delayed gratification. So this is another piece of where they're not sure if it actually falls under a principle behavior, because typically our principle behaviors have to be delivered immediately, whereas a lot of the self-management strategies, once you meet the behavior, it could be several hours till you get your reinforcement. And so that's why they partially think it may be an antecedent intervention. And that's what the delayed gratification piece of things is. So all that's kind of more philosophical.
Did you say about explanatory fiction?
That's more the piece of the psychological construct.
Okay.
So, alright. Yeah. So, alright. So applications of self-management. It's effective for everyday living. So, and we typically do that. Shopping lists are an example of self-management strategies. There's people that may go in there and buy all sorts of ice cream, but if they make a shopping list, they tend to follow that shopping list much better. Once again, that's a discussion with the wife. So we have a cabinet of chocolate that I'm trying to say I don't need. So we use self-management strategies when breaking bad habits. Cigarette smoking, is often utilized with some self-management strategy. Obesity, exercise, all that good stuff. So.
Biting your fingernails.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So, actually, before I jump on breaking bad habits, some of the things that they do talk about is that you need to, when you're implementing self-management strategies, you need to be careful what they call reinforcement traps, where you sometimes have either reinforcers that are more immediate than the bad habit, but then can become the bad habit itself. So for example, someone that may be biting their nails, they really like M&Ms, so they learn to say, all right, if I don't bite my nails in 5 minutes, I'll get an M&M, but then they start eating M&Ms every 5 minutes, and now they're addicted to M&Ms. So you gotta be careful of some of these reinforcement traps.
The difference between this so far and contingency contract is the fact that contingency contract is something that's written down.
Well, this could be written down as well. But with the contingency contracting, there's typically, you say, there's a set amount of time, and if you don't engage in the behavior at all, then you get the reinforcements. With self-management, the client's typically taking their own data, and they're tracking it to say, I met the criterion to get that piece of things. But contingency contracting is almost always brought into self-management because there should be some sort of reward at the end. Sometimes though with self-management, like, reducing smoking, there's just some internal gratifications, like internal reinforcement. So you don't necessarily have contingency contract there, you just realize that you're saving money, you might be feeling better, so. But typically, I'd say a lot of times there's some sort of self-management or contingency contract in the self-management strategy.
With self-management, would you mix in a little bit of a buddy system into the process? I mean, or is it all, centered around the client doing everything for himself or herself? Because like a buddy system, sometimes you call a person, did you do what you needed to do for today? type
Right.
thing?
And that all comes into how you set up your self-management plan. A lot of times there is that component, mainly to kind of get them into the habit of completing it. And we're going to go through one that we have, that I designed, that has very much that kind of monitoring from somebody else, but eventually weaned off so the individuals, ultimately controlling themselves. Because this, you really do want this to be set up as an independent program and not a reliance on someone. So, there we go. Okay. So, and of course, besides breaking bad habits, we want to make sure that self-management acquires good habits. So with any good behavioral plan, we want to put something in place where there is a replacement behavior. So, all right.
With an understanding of the invitation process.
Start reading.
So that's what I need. I could just put this here, let it run for 2 hours, and then go home. So, self-management also allows you to accomplish difficult tasks. So if those tasks are broken down, this is where chaining can kind of be brought into. Is, all right, let me just learn the first step of this. As soon as I get the first step down, then I can move on to the second step. So,
So if you were going to do, like, I wanted to implement a self-management, like with getting, finals done, and I would just start little by little.
yep.
Something like, okay, today you just work on this.
Yep.
If we're a procrastinator, how do you make this look enticing?
You would have to break it down into small steps. So, work on your paper for, well, you take your baseline. How often are they working on their paper? Once every 3 days?
Like,
An hour before class? Yeah.
You're talking about me.
So if they do their paper an hour before class, you say, okay, you can get a paper done in an hour. So Monday, let's just work on your paper for 10 minutes. And then as soon as 10 minutes is over, you're done. You don't even have to worry about it. And then Tuesday, maybe work on it for 15 minutes and slowly get it up to, where they might work on it for a full hour. But they start learning that, when I start earlier, and this is where it gets kind of, do the principles of behavior apply here? Do I realize that after 3 days of that self-management, I'm done with my paper and now I don't even have to worry about it? So they have, internal reinforcement of, hooray, I'm done, no stress whatsoever. So, yeah, typically, this is what one of my professors had told me, not behavior analysts, they told me procrastination actually has to do primarily with self-esteem, that you're not confident enough, and so you kind of procrastinate to avoid the task. So, but you could set a self-management strategy up to do that. So, and that's one I would definitely put a contingency contract enmeshed with. So,
What if you obviously you have to build in rewards, and the person has to choose whatever rewards are reinforcing to him or her, and it becomes a collaborative agreement. He or she's going to self-manage in this way and get the task done and get self-reward, and then the person basically, instead of doing the self-reward, just found getting the activity rewarding in and of itself. So didn't do the self-reward.
And that's where we want to be ideally.
Okay,
Yeah.
so actually it wasn't a failure then?
No, not at all. It was actually an absolute success.
Okay.
Yeah, because you don't want them necessarily relying on external reinforcers. You want it to be, contingent upon whatever's done and have the natural consequence of, I'm no longer stressed out about that paper.
Yeah, yeah.
It's done. I can go hang out with a friend by Thursday night instead of trying to get it in by Friday morning. So, and then you can of course use it for achieving goals of, all right, I have a dissertation to write. Let me break it up and say, this week I'm gonna crank out chapter 1. These next 3 months I'm gonna do chapter 2, and I'm gonna do 2 pages every day, sort of thing. And you can kind of chart your progress. They give a good example in the book about how Ernest Hemingway did this with a bunch of his stories. So 5 minutes. Got it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the advantages of self-management, not just the applications, but obviously it influences behaviors that usually are not accessible to external change agents. So a lot of times we use self-management when the person has to engage in these behaviors outside of our own observations. Because, for example, chain-A or antecedent interventions, these are things that often need the therapist present for. Self-management, the idea is to get to those natural consequences where the therapist doesn't have to be present. So, additionally, external change agents, obviously miss important instances of behavior. They can't be present for everything. So unless you're Big Brother and you've got everything on camera. So it promotes generalization and maintenance. So, person under the self-management strategy, we typically do it in various settings, different activities, whatever it may be. And so they start learning to control their behaviors in many different environments instead of being, stuck in just like a clinical setting or a school setting, whatever it may be. So it has a small repertoire of self-management skills, can control many behaviors. So just being able to say, I can set up a self-management strategy, you can apply that to your smoking, your weight loss, your exercise, your homework completion. So that one tactic can apply to many different skills. It's been used with individuals of all sorts of abilities. So from your, like I said, Ernest Hemingway's, down to your, developmentally disabled students. So, hopefully it increases motivation, and improves performance. So, it can contribute to group environments. So one person can kind of do a self-management strategy that will help the whole group. When you do group projects and things are parsed out to everybody and you have some sort of, like not the term now, like not a mediator.
Leader?
A what?
A leader?
Yes, basically, yeah, a leader. Who can say, here's what I need everybody to do, get it back to me, by this week, and I'll shoot back the information, and so they can set up self-management so everybody else, hopefully is working and adapting towards it. So, it allows practice in other areas. Where's my cursor? My cursor disappeared. Curses. There it is. All right. All right. Oh, not what I wanted. Let's see. For all education, the ultimate goal of education, for all those doctorate students is that they are self-controlled, and they're able to complete dissertations and papers and research studies all on their own, and they don't need someone to, hold their hands. And it's beneficial to society. Allows you to have individual freedom, so you don't have to rely on a therapist to help you. And then hopefully the natural consequence, it just feels good when you are able to manage your own behavior and control whatever those bad habits are that you're in. So, or meet a goal that you need to. So, all right, so we're gonna do a little activity. This is not the first activity, this is the second one. Yes?
I have a question.
Yep.
For that, for the self-management, you said we need to collect the baseline data. But if I want to do it to myself, I need to collect baseline data.
It's ideal to collect baseline data on yourself, just so you know if your self-management strategy is working or not. Or if you need to add another strategy or tactic in place. So,
So what would that look like? Which is before you just would write down what it is before you
yeah.
start a goal, like if I'm training for my half marathon, it's like,
How far can you run, or how often are you running?
so if I'm using a guide, like, how something,
Yep.
like half marathon, and it tells me how many to do.
Yep, that's a self-management
Each one,
strategy
that's
right there.
self-management.
Yep.
And so then when my reward becomes actually running, instead of the medal at the end of because I get the euphoria from running,
Yep.
instead of the medal at the end of the half marathon, then that's just the intrinsic reward
Yep.
that I'm on.
Yep, exactly. So, weight loss is often used with self-management, counting calories or, how much weight you've lost. And so normally you'd have your, weigh-in before you start all that. So this is how much I weigh. So,
So if for the dissertations, like I have 0 pages from the beginning, like that, the data was 0.
Yep.
So I set up a goal like I want. So how, if it is 0, how should it become a baseline of that?
you have 0 pages on, that's your baseline.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it. Okay.
If you already know that you're a well-managed individual, then you typically wouldn't, or unless you're already using a self-management strategy, you wouldn't worry about that. I've known several people, I've went through classes with that just wouldn't start their dissertation on their, professor was like, all right, I kind of want an idea of what you're doing here in 2 weeks, and they rolled around, well, I haven't really thought about it. And those are the people that would need a self-management strategy where the professor would say, all right, listen, I want 10 articles on my desk, with the summaries by, the end of the month. And so then the professor typically would put the self-management strategy in. But hopefully, down the road, they would start managing their own and get their dissertation done, hopefully.
So it sounds like a business, given all the ABDs that exist in the world.
Yeah, and a lot of businesses will do self-management strategies too, so.
If someone puts you in like a self-management plan, is it self-management?
And that's the kind of discussion process, the argument that we talked about at the very beginning. Is it really a self-management strategy? Has it controlled your behavior? Or is it something that is controlling your reaction to the behavior? So, yeah, and that's kind of where we're like, I don't know exactly how it falls under. So some people argue it's a antecedent intervention and it doesn't fall under the principles of behavior. Some say because of the natural consequence you're getting out of it, that's actually what's controlling the behavior, and it wouldn't have happened if self-management strategy was there. So we'll have that discussion at the very end. So, yeah. Okay, so the activity, for those that have their books, it's on page 585 here. I have 584 in my notes. Oh, that's both pages, 584 to 585. So this is a computer program that someone designed to teach self-management for children. All right. So I should cut this out, but put it on the slide. But on page 584, you see, where the child can pick a tool. They have things like point cards, which we've talked about with token economies. I don't have no idea what count tunes are. But you have monitoring cards, you have make a plan, and you have contracts. So there's contingency contracts. So the child can pick whatever tool they feel would work for them. So then on page 585, you see an example of what would be their star card. So the kid would monitor, do I yell at someone when they bump my desk? You know, and the kid marks down, yes, I did, and here's the time that I yelled at them for. No, I went through class without it. And so the kid's monitoring their own behavior and marking down whether that's occurred or not. So I was gonna have us design a self-management tool similar to kids' tools and the kids' skills, but I don't think we're gonna do that. But I would say, let's take a couple minutes, just talk to your neighbor about, you know, the graphs and what you think are effective for kids and interventions. We're gonna do an adult one at the end, so just focus on how you would adapt the self-management strategy for kids and clients that you may work with. So take a couple minutes, discuss.
Yep, real quick. We get 3 exams a week for this so
3 times a week.
and
And then I was
yeah, it glitched out. Then I started reading new questions, and I accidentally with submissions of like
Okay.
so not,
Well, I'll reset them all tomorrow, I think, right?
okay.
So then you'll get another 3 times.
Okay. So they reset tomorrow.
Yeah, hopefully tomorrow, if not, it'll be Saturday, but sometime very soon.
Okay.
5 minutes for anyone that's paying attention.
Alright. So discussing.
It just feels like more goes into it. It's probably not necessarily a big deal. So we can understand some of the 7-year-old
Design something like this. Self-management tool for children. On tasks. Too big? Is it measurable?
To us, it's not, but you know, that's why you would say, refresh, check.
So we gotta check this.
Radar, and
All right, do you guys want a few more minutes to discuss? I mean, there wasn't really an objective to this, so. I have no idea. It's a tool I've never used before. It looks pretty old. Yeah. So, but the tactic and strategy is still the same, despite how old it is. So. Yep.
I was thinking that before this, the kid would have to be like self-aware. Where
Yes.
some kids don't know, like, I know I yelled at you, or, you know.
And that's definitely a big piece of this, is that they need to have a clear understanding what the target behavior is. So, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. All right. Anything else that kind of came out of it that you guys had questions or, you know, brilliant thoughts that how you would change the world with this? All right, nothing? All right. Let's talk about self-management as an antecedent-based tactic. So we can manipulate the self-management strategy so, it can manipulate the motivating operation piece of things. So changing that value of the reinforcer. One of the things that I think the book provided as an example, that I know I typically try to do myself is when I go grocery shopping, I'll try to eat something before grocery shopping. Otherwise, you just buy all sorts of things that are not on your list. I also put a list in place, but by eating, I'm going through those aisles and the food is not as motivating and interesting to me anymore as if I go there when I'm hungry. So you can definitely manipulate motivating operations by just saying, every time I go to the grocery store, I'm gonna eat. So you can put response prompts in place. So these could be picture cues. I know I've seen it for stuff like taking out the trash on Tuesdays, because that's when the garbage man will pick it up. So on your calendar every Tuesday, there's a little picture of a trash can and say, hey honey, and stuck there. So that's some sort of response prompt to get you to manage your own behavior to get the trash out, versus waking up at 5:30 and running the trash cans out there because you hear the truck coming down the road. So you could put behavior chains in place to try to evoke that desired behavior and to get that SD to occur. So the example they used, there's 5 minutes again. So the example they used in the book was, they talk about, you hear on the weather the night before that it's gonna rain the next day. And so you're like, oh, I need to get my umbrella. However, when you're waking up in the morning, you're going through all your routines, you may say in the back of your mind, that's right, it's gonna rain, but you may not actually, pick up your umbrella. So when you do hear it rains, you're gonna put your umbrella right by the door. And so that's kind of your SD as you're going out the door. Oh yeah, there's my umbrella, let me grab it. And then, you'll have it for when it actually rains. So instead of going through that whole behavioral chain, going through your closet, finding it, blah, blah, blah. So you can put a response block in. So this is big with cigarette smokers. If the cigarettes aren't easily available, you're not going to engage in the response, obviously. So it's going to be a lot more effort to go out there and buy, a pack of cigarettes. So you can do that to try to prevent the behavior. Once again, that's something to self-manage your behavior down the road. Or you can limit the stimulus conditions. So you can make it, more annoying to engage in those behaviors. So, if you tell yourself, I'm only going to smoke on the roof of my house. Now, when you really want a cigarette, you gotta pull out the ladder, climb up to the roof, and smoke your cigarette up there. But once again, these are all things that really require you to have good self-control and self-management. But once again, we put tactics and things in place to kind of help, that individual go that route.
Question.
Yep.
Say a person wants to study, but they find him or herself in an environment at home where it's utter chaos.
Yep.
Getting and moving themselves into a different environment would be what from this list?
I would probably have that under
Response block?
either a response block or maybe a stimulus condition, but probably a response block, because
Okay.
depending on what their reaction is,
Reaction is not to study.
Yeah, what they would do instead, like for me, maybe it'd be playing video games. So if I go to Starbucks, I can't play video games because I can't even engage in that response
Gotcha.
anymore. So, but if it's because it's a distracting environment, then maybe they're limiting the stimulus conditions there. So maybe they throw on a pair of noise canceling headphones.
Okay.
Or they say, I'm only going to study in my bedroom, and when I'm out where everybody else is,
Gotcha.
I'm not going to try to engage in studying. So, all right. So self-monitoring is a subcomponent of self-management, but this is what you'll often read in the literature, and sometimes they'll call it self-recording or self-observation. But this is really client-based, unless they're therapist-based. So this is really relying on that client engaging in all their own monitoring of whatever that target behavior is. So, and like I just said, behavior systematically is recorded, whether the occurrence or non-occurrence of that target behavior is done by that person. So, with that said, I don't know what time we started our activity yet, but we're probably up to a couple sessions now. We're going to have return of the activity. Oh, my animations did not fail. So, all right.
Use the force, Luke.
Yeah, unfortunately, the force is going to be escape right here. Okay, where's my cursor? Because now you guys can't even see what's underneath it. I'll just slide that to the side because I want that for later. Okay. So what you're going to do with your activity is with your client, you're going to review what the target behavior was that you were looking at and what their baseline data is. Then you're going to design a self-monitoring data sheet for your client, and the client is going to self-control their own behavior for the remainder of the time. So as the therapist, you might want to do some iterator reliability just to make sure they have good self-control. But where everything previously was, the data collector was responsible for, now it's going to shift, and now the client is the one responsible for keeping track of that data. So I'll still have the 5-minute timer going off, but now it's going to be more for the client. So spend a little time with your client talking about what you're monitoring them on. So, and a lot of it, yeah.
Oh, I thought.
I guess.
We want to be the self-management strategy.
So how do you do the strategy?
So it wasn't a very good activity design for you.
You want to do this thing, cool chart?
But you can talk about maybe some other behavior that you might engage on, how you would design a self-control or self-monitoring strategy. And we're going to go through an example of 2 of them.
So, my boy.
Actually, make it two sometimes. You can't go negative. You're such a taskmaster. It's crazy.
I knew what was going on as soon as I heard the first bell. I knew the reaction was kind of like, but then I go,
Every 5 minutes.
that's just a little too convenient.
At least once in 5 minutes.
Given that situation.
And I got baseline at 0.
Yeah, you.
Baseline is 0. But if he had engaged, could I say, turn it around? Does that work, or do you want to?
That would be
Lock it.
responsible.
Yeah.
Until it's still technically turned on. Then you said, the winter phone in the car. That was definitely.
But it is kind of hassle to sit there and this phone kind of ping there. It's got to reset it all the time.
Yeah, I did that a lot.
Kind of goes to the.
Connor was on the forum, is Dan taking it up?
I lost dog. People text me.
Well, if it's shared, yeah, definitely not Pavlov stuff.
Pull it out.
We got them under a self-management
Yeah, it's your fault. Every time you check this one, check it. Because Parsons guys are wrecking. He went for it. Have to work.
Well, we'll see. You might be our good example, Josh. So, okay, yes.
When we're setting, so now would we set her, like, would I set her a goal as far as, so she's gone the most 15 minutes without looking at her phone. So then we say every 20 minutes you can look at it?
So in this case, we probably look at a percentage.
Okay.
So what percentage of the time is she engaged in that phone?
42%.
42% of the time. So what you would want to do then is set her criterion. I mean, 42% is probably, I'd probably set her at, let's say 60%. So during our session, if she hits 60% or above, then she can self-reinforce herself.
So I guess it would be the opposite, because
Or
right now she
opposite.
engages with her phone 40%, so she gets
Okay.
like.
Oh, so, yeah, so we want to drop it down then to, whatever, 25%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, normally you talk about what would be the replacement behavior. I want you to listen in class and not be distracted 60% of the time.
Okay.
So, or whatever it may be. So, yeah. So, all right. So, for those that were under some sort of stimulus control, Josh, you mind if I use you as an example? So, Josh had the perfect stimulus control. Apparently, every time my phone beeped, he immediately went for his. So,
Anyway, I was trying to keep record of what is happening because I was looking at their eyes. There was nothing going on. They weren't communicating. So I was like, what? Yeah, what? So I decided to be. So I have all the time that is from beep.
So, you were glad to get at him.
Yeah, so we're gonna see how well the self-control strategy works for Josh. 'Cause my phone will still beep the same. So, all right. So I've started the timer. Just kind of as a side note of this, I might have told this story already. I may not have. So I have a group of friends that will go out, and it's so much habit. Did I tell the story already? Okay.
I don't think so.
It's so much habit for so many of them to check their phones constantly or to be sitting there texting that we've implemented a self-management strategy. And I didn't even do it. One of the other guys did it. He was like, we never sit here and talk, when we're all hanging out. We just look at our phones. So when we all get together, we put our phones in the middle. And if it's like at a restaurant or whatever, put our phones in the middle. First person to touch their phone has to pick up the bill. So we all sit there and we'll hear our phones beep, we'll see them vibrate, and we're like, nope, not gonna touch it. So, and on a side note to that, I wasn't with the group at this time, but one of the girls, I guess she had been talking about it at work, and two of the people worked together. And so the other person was like, told the boss, hey, we're going out, text her. So the boss texted her 3 times, and she's like, I'm sorry guys, or called her 3 times, she's like, this must be really important. He's called 3 times, she picked it up, and the boss was like, looks like you're picking up the bill. It was hilarious. I was like, why wasn't I out that night? But it was a self-management strategy because so many people have that Pavlovian response to my phone dings, rings, I'm going to ignore everybody else and answer it. So it's kind of a fun thing that we
Now the management scheme that you guys implemented, what category would that wouldn't be a response block, would it?
No, that one I would argue it falls under not an antecedent intervention but a principle of behavior, because there's that ideally it's a negative. It would be a positive punishment piece of things, because as soon as you pick it up, you have to pick up the bill,
Okay.
which most people obviously don't want to pay for everybody's meal. So there I would argue it's a principle of behavior.
Okay.
So, yeah. But once again, maybe it's antecedent because now everyone's aware. It's an interesting discussion. So Malat talks a lot about it.
You guys weren't all BCBAs, were you?
No,
Oh.
I'm actually the only BCBA.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's a bunch of ultimate frisbee people. Most of them are like computer science or chemical engineering. So, yeah, bunch of nerds.
Brainiac is such nicer.
So here's a graph that they talk about in the book, where now I totally blanked on, and I did put in my notes. I forget what behavior is. Oh, percent study and behavior. Yeah, study behavior. So how often, this individual engages in behavior. And so obviously, the therapist is the one probably taking the baseline data. So they would say, all right, go study for 2 hours, and they would see how often they get distracted, by engaging in their phone, drawing, whatever it may be. Then they implemented a self-recording. So every 5 minutes, they would mark down, there's probably a whole interval recording, did I study that entire time? And they would monitor how much they actually studied of that whole interval. And so as you can see, it tends to jump up. Here they marked where the self-control strategy wasn't in place, they didn't have their slip. So self-recording plus praise, so theoretically here, the therapist is coming in after those intervals, hey, nice job studying. Only praise, so, and then back to baseline. And so you can see with that praise, it ended up maintaining the behavior. So without that self-control strategy in place, which is ideally what we want to foster that independence. So, yeah. And their little squiggly line for the big break.
Yeah.
And they talk about this study in the book, so you can look at it. All right, then there's the piece of self-evaluation. So comparing your performance with a predetermined goal or standard. So in this case, this is much more where you kind of set your contingency of, if I get 10% of my dissertation done, then I get whatever, my weekend free. So this really encourages the client to take a look at their data, compare where their progress is, and determine whether they met this. Self-evaluation, often used in businesses too. Did you meet your quota for car sales or whatever it may be? So, and then they take a look at what their goal was, and increase it, decrease it, whatever it may be. So, all right. So, in order to have successful self-monitoring, so when you're reflecting upon whatever self-control strategy you set up with your partner here, did you have the ease of materials? Did they have access to their sheet to say, I can easily mark it? Did you make it attainable? Or did you say, I'm gonna ignore Connor's timer every 5 minutes, I want you to mark every 2 seconds, not obviously attainable to keep that up. And is it understandable? Obviously, since it's client controlled, we want to make sure that client can go off without you being present and actually understand what they're supposed to be marking. If they're not marking accurately or not detecting their behavior correctly, it's not going to be successful. So, you may have to add additional prompts and cues when necessary. So, for example, telling your significant other that they have to empty the dishwasher whenever it's clean. I've seen cute little magnets that have the white sheet when it's clean and the dirty sheet when it's dirty. And so you have that prompt of the white sheet is up, time to clean, empty the dishwasher. So you have that additional prompt and cue, which will hopefully get them to engage in that behavior. And then they can mark up, yes, I emptied the dishwasher. And then go relax and watch whatever TV show that you like to watch. You want to make sure that you're measuring the important dimensions. So not just throwing out willy-nilly behaviors and saying, monitor that. Otherwise, your client's gonna be like, I don't see the benefit in this, so. If you can, have them record immediately and consistently. So don't have them wait a couple hours to mark down, that they did it, unless that's part of the self-monitoring strategy. So, did I go 3 hours without having my cigarettes? Then that's okay. But if they hit that time, have them mark it immediately. So, because once again, if you're looking to eventually fade it to a longer period, you want that, duration to be accurate every time. So you could say, here's a good natural fade for you. So, and then reinforce accurate self-monitoring. So, if the client is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, mark it down. So, like for example, Weight Watchers, I think they have several points that you're supposed to hit or not go over in a week. Obviously, your client can cheat and be like, oh yeah, I didn't have that chocolate cake. And you don't want to say, oh, good job, when they actually did. So you really want to encourage accurate self-monitoring. All right, so let's talk about an example of a self-monitoring real life situation here, not in your book. I'll read this so you don't have to try to squint and read it all. So I had a client that was a 13-year-old student in high school. He had a diagnosis of autism and other health impairments, which included ADHD, OCD, and Tourette's. The client was above average in IQ and performed advanced in all areas of academic performance. His behaviors, though, included being off task, perseveration and arguing over correct responses when corrected. Even when he was clearly wrong, he would still argue and get on the staff's face. There was elopement issues, and he had defiance that resulted in physical aggression through posturing, so like, flinching at people or, getting, like, towering over them. He's a big kid, being 13. Through objects, property destruction, and several verbal threats towards staff. So pretty significant behaviors, so something we want to socially address. The behaviors occurred with a frequency approximately once every 9 days, essentially. So we had our baseline data. He's engaging in these behaviors, at least every other week. So he had his reinforcers, which he liked to hang out with certain staff. He liked to play on his cell phone. He liked small prizes from his school psychologist, so who ended up being a very integral part of this plan. So we had a summary of his behaviors, and so we were able to say, all right, some of these overlap too, because sometimes he would be defiant and disruptive. But this was just we had some ABC data, some descriptive assessments. Ring a bell for everybody? So we were able to quickly say, all right, here's the frequency of his behaviors. We looked at, some of the settings, and we were able to get a predicted function from what people thought he was trying to do. And you can see avoidance. People primarily thought he was avoiding tasks. And usually by that intimidation, or not only avoiding tasks, but also avoiding corrections. Attention, avoidance, demand.
Okay.
Usually, fourth function that we usually talk about?
I just couldn't read it in there.
Access, attention, and
Escape.
escape, and then the control situation.
And then
Automatic, that's the other one. And it was clear that this wasn't an automatic reinforcement. And this isn't what I came up with. This is what when you do the descriptive assessments, usually the staff or whoever's, identified, they think that's what this contributes to. So, but for the issue of self-monitoring, I actually didn't really care what I thought the function of was, because ultimately I'm putting the responsibility back on the client. So the tactic, there were 3 phases that we had to this tactic. The first one, I just named our client Joe. So at the end of the period, Joe would determine if he followed the classroom and school rules for that period. So very general target behavior, but he knew, it was assignment completion. And I think eventually we even broke these down to assignment completion, respecting staff, whatever it may be. And so at the end of the period, he had a sheet and he marked down, yes or no, I followed the school rules, all right? Then he took this agenda to the staff and they recorded whether he was accurate, you know. So if he said, yes, I followed the school rules, and he did, the staff would initial and say, hey, great job, Joe. And they would positively, verbally reinforce him. If he wasn't accurate, his behavior was reviewed. So if he said, yes, you know, I followed the school rules, but he had gotten up in someone's face, they would say, all right, you didn't have that correct response. You were defiant, and they would circle it and put their initial. So this started teaching Joe what an accurate response was and what an accurate response wasn't. Because maybe it was he doesn't actually know what the school rules was, so he was learning it. But he was a smart kid. He knew what school rules were. He was just trying to manipulate the situation sometimes. So, oops, that's out of order. But we would give Joe a chance to, we would say, Joe, you didn't tact your behavior correctly, you need to fix it, and Mark, no, you weren't. And that also gave him a chance to, with his target behavior, learn to take a correction. And so if he was able to say, yeah, you're right, cross off, yes, I, you know, engaged in it, and put, no, I did not have this, follow the school rules, he got half a point. So what we were looking at is that ultimately he would have 30 opportunities to be accurate, and we set a criterion of you need to be accurate for 90% of a week. So now Joe is kind of starting to learn what an accurate response and what following school rules should be, and he's got some incentives to follow through with that. And all we cared about is that Joe was accurate. He could be a nightmare for an entire week, but as long as he knew he was a nightmare, then we know that he can absolutely identify what that behavior was and start self-reflecting on that. So all we were looking for was accuracy in phase 1. Yes?
But Joe, what if Joe didn't have an incentive to fill out his form?
Well, and then we didn't have good reinforcers.
Then we didn't have good data.
Right, exactly. And which actually happened in this study because Joe didn't see the point of filling it out and the staff didn't see the point of filling it out. And we just had constant behaviors and they said none of this is working. And once again, thank goodness we had a great school psychologist that was like, listen folks, here's what we need to do. And we actually ended up putting in a group contingency for this where we said, listen staff, if you guys can do this for just a month.
I think it was 2 weeks.
2 weeks, well, we said 2 weeks. If you could do it for 2 weeks, you don't have to do this again. Like, it's done. And we'll take it away. And so that got some incentive going. Yeah. They're like, oh, really? Yeah.
For like 2 weeks, it's long enough?
Well, in this case, what we suspected, honestly, was that Joe would fall under the contingencies within 2 weeks if the staff were following through with their contingencies. And so 2 weeks did actually end up being enough to move us on to phase 2.
Because Joe actually knew that if he did it for 2 weeks as well,
Yeah.
then he could fade it out.
Yeah. So, yeah. And so the second phase of this is that instead of looking at Joe's accuracy, now we're looking at that Joe's actually following the school rules. So before he would get reinforced for just being accurate, now he has to follow the school rules to get whatever his reinforcement would be. So.
Do you know off the top of your head what the reinforcers were?
Yes, it was. He loved getting these little prizes from the school psychologist on Fridays. He liked the opportunity. Actually, he started liking the fact that he'd come in and say, I had a good week. And everyone's like, yeah, you did. You know, have a good weekend.
So praise and all
Oh,
that
okay.
It ended up being Baker's fries on Friday.
Okay, yeah.
Baker's fries.
So and the client got to choose the reinforcer. Like it was, Yeah.
Okay.
So we knew it was like, when we talked about token economies, it was a menu essentially. And it was a very open-ended menu. So we knew whatever it was at the end of the week, it was gonna be reinforcing for him.
Did he have to have a certain number of points?
Yes.
In order to get
Yep.
what he
Yeah.
wanted, I mean, from the menu?
Oh, no, this wasn't set up as a point. This was set up as, on your self-monitoring sheet, if you were first phase accurately tacting it 90% of the time, you got it.
You got it correct, okay.
Yep. And then the second phase was if you had good behavior for 90%, but he had to have the sheet to demonstrate it. You couldn't just say, oh yeah, it was good, or rely on the staff to say, oh yeah, he was good. He had to produce the sheet that he marked down and the staff initialed, to verify that here it is, I did well.
So that was his permanent product.
That was his permanent product, yeah, exactly. So, and it became my permanent product to show the data. So that was phase 2. Phase 3 then is that he'll be able to do all of this, but he's only, instead of recording it every period, instead of him checking in, and I think he was checking in with the school psychologist almost every day of, here's my sheet that I filled out today. He was only doing it by the end of the week, he'd bring the sheet in. And I don't even think we had got to this point. I think we actually ended up having our meeting before we hit this point. But he would bring it in theoretically at the end of the week instead of having to check in every day.
So you moved from daily sheets
to weekly sheets.
That's
Yeah.
is that considered kind of a, well, of course you said the kid is really intelligent, but is that, we're talking a pretty big jump there.
It is a
One
pretty
day
big jump.
To 5 days.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, he came under control really quickly once he was put on this. And there was, and some of it, I think, goes back to the principle of behavior of, initially the staff would just focus on the negative behaviors that he had. And that's all they would ever talk to him about or talk about with their peers was, oh, Joe is, such a nightmare. And then once they started realizing that 90% of the time, he's actually a pretty good student, they started building a better rapport with him, which then kind of,
So he was reinforced by their change of attitude.
Exactly. And so Joe was self-monitoring his own behavior and coming under the control, the staff also started kind of coming under a positive relationship with him. So it was definitely a 2-tiered approach. Yeah.
I never thought about it before, but you did shape the teacher's behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a tricky thing.
But like intrinsic motivation, that's what happened here, right?
For him, yeah.
But we
And for the
can't measure
teachers.
that, can we, or can you?
We can't. Ultimately, that's kind of what we want to happen. But he does, at this point now, I can tell you, he's not getting Baker's fries. He's not,
Sometimes.
oh, well, in that case,
Behavior.
well, I may have to talk to the school psych on that. But hopefully it's not every week that he's getting it. It's more sporadic. And so hopefully he is starting to come under that more control of, I'm having a good day, I'm not getting myself in trouble, people are treating me more positively, I'm getting more work done. And honestly, I would say he's a success. I'm not sure I've even heard of him this entire school year.
He's
And
highly successful.
yes,
Very
highly successful. And this is very much a team approach, I will say. Yes?
I know with certain kids who have limited abilities, you can't get informed consent from them. I assume you're getting informed consent from parents? Or?
Yes, and this school setting, so we had an IEP and we,
Okay.
put the behavior plan in place.
And I know a lot of times it sounds like you almost have to, like with the adults, the teachers, and you almost have to do double duty and actually.
Sometimes.
In our research, when we do experimental modalities like that, we call that deceit. And then we have to come back to them
And tell them later,
tell them.
yeah.
Is it the same in ADA? Okay.
Well,
Okay.
it depends on what your setting is.
I
It's not the same in the school setting. I don't have to go and tell the staff that I was really messing with them. And I wasn't.
Because I was wondering, because that can actually create some hard feelings sometimes.
Oh, yes.
If people feel like they're being manipulated.
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of real heavy dialogue, sometimes not.
Yeah.
Between teachers
there were definitely some staff that didn't want to engage in this and wanted to basically acknowledge the fact that these students is a troublemaker
Yeah.
and wanted to leave it at
beyond
that.
repairs.
Yeah.
How
So,
many teachers were involved or adults were involved in this?
he had 6 different teachers. Well, actually, I think he had one teacher twice, so 5 different teachers in a semester. And this went over an entire school year that we were working with this. Plus, we had administration involved, counselor. I want to say even the sheriff got involved once before. Parents definitely involved. So,
How did they feel after, they see the change? Did they actually?
well, the last IEP I went for the student, everyone said how great it was. And this, if you're an egotistical person, you have to let it go.
Yeah,
Because
you can't.
in the IEP meeting, it was like, I'm just so impressed how mature he's become. It's because he's gotten older, and I'm just sitting there like, yep, that's all it was. It was just maturity kicked in. It just, nope.
You can't,
Yeah.
you gotta let go of wanting to take credit for this.
Yep. Yeah.
How did you decide to use this approach from the first beginning? You just tried it?
No, part of the reason I chose this approach for this individual was partially because his IQ was so high that I knew he could detect what an appropriate behavior was and wasn't. And he really, you could tell that he was manipulating a lot of situations, and he was quite aware he was manipulating those. And so we really wanted to put something in place where he could start becoming independent with it. Additionally, he's in high school, he's planning to go to college. He's at some point going to need to learn to self-manage his own, behavior. So that's why I chose this strategy, because it's something hopefully that he could down the road say, I had trouble with this and this is what I used to do, maybe I could put this in place, at this setting. So, yes.
Was he on any medication before this,
No.
during or after?
Nope. No medications whatsoever.
So self-management works better for the people who have strong self-control or the control ability?
It does, but that's partially why initially in phase 1, we really had to get the staff involved and do that accuracy piece of things, because we had to teach him the self-control. I guarantee if we had just said, mark it yourself and bring it in, he would have marked he was perfect the entire time. And obviously that wouldn't have been accurate whatsoever. So we had to teach him the self-control piece of things by saying, I don't care how awful you are, it's all based upon accuracy. And that was honestly I think the biggest fight we had with the staff was they really wanted to punish him for inappropriate behavior. And we were like, we don't care about that yet. We'll get to that. Just get him under control of some rules first.
Or they didn't want him, if they wrote, no, you really didn't follow the rules, they were afraid that then he would have outbursts.
Right. So.
Do you know if his function was to escape or attention or access to it? Do you have a sense there?
I suspect it was probably a lot more of, I think it was escape, because I think a lot of it occurred when he felt he was wrong, or that someone was telling him he was wrong and he wasn't wrong. I think there was an element of attention as well.
What about boredom? Because now that, because he was in special ed classes, and now that he's in general ed and has a 4.0 and no behavior problems.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, because of the high IQ.
And I don't think it was necessarily boredom, and that would put that one under self-reinforcement, that function. I don't think it was boredom. Otherwise, you typically see it across all sorts of settings. And there were certain classes that he was okay in. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. Because boredom could happen, sporadically. I don't know. I just didn't feel it was boredom.
I agree with Christine. I think it's boredom because he likes learning. Like once he's engaged in the learning process, like learn what is accuracy about the whole process, and he's not interested in that.
Well, he was not interested in doing this at all at first. No, he didn't. He didn't want to do
No,
this.
yeah, it is,
But there were certain,
challenged in the classrooms.
and I actually one of the reasons I can think of now, there was a teacher that he was great for one semester and then just fell apart the second semester. And the teacher's style of instruction didn't change.
But he was repeating the same class, so was it because you were bored because you'd heard it before?
There was another class that they had with that teacher that was a different, because he had
Oh, yeah,
history.
that's right.
Yeah. So, and originally I think we had thought it might have been attention actually from that teacher, because he would act up and that teacher would come in to work with that student, because that teacher was very effective at calming him down. Yeah, he was a great teacher.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, had they ever discussed medication management at one
Yeah.
time?
Yes,
And-
parent was very adamant about no.
Oh, that's why, okay.
Yeah.
You
So-
said that he didn't like really care about what the function was. Does that mean that this can work regardless of function?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, which once again, kind of goes back to, I could argue that self-management is an antecedent intervention, because it doesn't matter what the consequence is, it's something in place. But at the same time, just changing the teacher's behavior may have changed the consequence for that student, because now, and maybe his tantrums and defiance were to get out of that one individual teacher who may have been completely negative on him, but now they have a positive relationship and they built rapport. Yeah, so I don't know. In the end, I wasn't really caring about function. I was like, the strategy I think will work.
So did you not have to do an FBA?
I did, but the way I outlined it was I looked at the ideological aspect and I said there's something here in the environment that needs to be changed, and he needs to learn this aspect, and it doesn't, the maintaining consequences, I don't know what those are yet.
So that wasn't a real rigid by the book,
No.
1, 2, 3 FBA.
No, and a lot of times in a real life setting, it's really hard to follow by the book. Yeah, unless you're in a clinical setting, there's a lot of adaptations that you have to throw in there and change up.
This is kind of where you kind of, through experience, just have a sense of this is where I need to go with this.
Clinical judgment?
Yeah.
Can we even use that word in FBA? I mean, in ABA, clinical
Te-
judgment?
technically no, but yeah. It happens a lot.
That's what happens.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I wasn't ultimately trying to say, here is a tactic or strategy we're going to use all the time, or here's, the function. I was just like, let's get this kid under control and move on.
In a sense, if it didn't work, you'd try something else.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that
So
would
it's
be
tentative.
a functional analysis on some level.
Your
to a
hypothesis
degree.
is tentative.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, once again, it's really hard to say what the function is with a self-management strategy, because it's still argued amongst big
Yeah.
behavior analysts of, is it an antecedent intervention or is it affecting the principles of behavior? We don't know. So, yeah, and it's really hard to tease out. So, because with self-management, there is all that reactivity. Your client clearly knows you're doing something with them. It's nothing subversive. So, yeah. In the end, it worked, and I was happy. So, yeah. All right.
So we're dead now, right?
Oh, no. Not even close.
Because we got you and everything.
Oh, and I totally forgot to reset my timer, so it's not going to beep again. All right. Well, let's go to the conclusion of our activity that we were doing here. So let's review the self-monitoring results. A lot of people didn't have any baseline because they weren't engaging in their phones to begin with. So let's turn to our example. Josh, how are you doing with your, how many times did you look at your phone here?
Yeah, perfectly good. Just once.
Perfect, just once.
Yeah.
So out of, how many sessions do we have?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so
It's
5.
61. We get almost going to the 61.
So did you, so Josh ended up 20% of his time looking at his phone after he put self-control, self-monitoring strategy, versus 100% of the time before. So clearly he was able to say, I'm going to start controlling my behavior because I've got this piece in place. Anybody else have a baseline, or anybody else improve their behavior? All right, way to go. Anybody not improve their behavior?
You stayed the same.
Stayed the same, not surprised. Nobody's behavior got worse though from it? All right.
I feel like the behavior could get worse because now you're like, I'm going 5 minutes on my phone. When before maybe you weren't thinking about it, but now it's like,
Right.
brings you, you're aware.
You're aware of your addiction.
Yeah.
But I mean, that honestly is a good thing, and that's actually what you're trying to get out of the self-monitoring piece is before where your subconscious essentially was controlling your behavior, now you're aware of what that SD may be that's controlling your behavior, and you can move it to the side. So like for cigarette smokers, they can start to identify in social situations I find myself smoking,
After
or
a meal.
after a meal, whatever it may be. And so it's kind of bringing up, here's the SD that's evoking this behavior out of me.
So saying like your subconscious, that's not, like behavioralists don't look at that, or behavior analysts, they would say that that's not.
They do in the fact that, something is controlling your behavior, and you may not even be aware that it's controlling your behavior. So, yeah. They would say that there's an SD out there that's evoking that behavior. But you may be completely unaware that it's happening. So subconsciously it, essentially would. So, but all you know is that when you engage in that behavior, you get whatever principal behavior is driving that. I get reinforced and I feel calmer, whatever it may be. So, make sense? So people feel comfortable implementing self-monitoring strategies. Everyone's going to probably go home and do it themselves. Like, here's what I want to do. So just remember the classic, tons of people implement self-management strategies at New Year's Eve, and very few of them ever succeed, usually because they set their criterion so high. So that's where you really need to set your criterion low.
Why do so many weight loss programs fail? I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry with a 90% fail rate. I mean, that's,
It has, obviously it's up to the individual, but it may be that the criterion is too high for them. It could be that there isn't a replacement behavior in place, or that the individual doesn't have the initial self-control strategy. It could be, it goes back to that where we talked about, what makes a self-management strategy, successful. Maybe the tool that they're using is way too complicated. And partially I haven't done it, but I've seen people when, they do calorie counting, they have to look up each item that they've had. That's so much effort to do. It's easier to just say, never mind. It's easier now with some phones because you can go straight to like TGIF and say, I just had the double bacon cheeseburger with melted cheese and grilled onions on top, and you click and you're like, all right, 3,000 calories, and it logs it up right away.
There's actually a program called Lose It, and you don't have to, the amount of energy goes into is just typing in what you ate, and they have a big database as to the calories, so you don't have to read labels.
Yep.
And I think you like portion size too.
Say again?
I think there's portion size as well. Like you can take every type of raw.
You're looking at your phone.
Yeah, I know, I'm looking for
Timer stopped, don't worry.
There's a genetic component too, and also there's the drive for people to eat on a very primitive level when food is available.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's food is
So we're
bad because you
going
have to eat.
against our
You don't have to smoke
societal
a cigarette.
norms here because food is so readily available. And then stressors too, your cortisol levels go up and you eat.
But then we
Our
wouldn't
stresses are different.
measure that.
But cortisol levels we would.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, that.
Yeah. Or we can not accurate, it's a little more subjective, but look at stress levels of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressful. But you would definitely look at doing the self-monitoring. So every time you eat, you would analyze your behavior. If you think it's due to stress, all right, I ate, what was my stress level beforehand? You would mark it down. And so if you could start saying, I'm feeling stressed, I'm at a 9 right now, then you say, normally I would go eat, so let me find something else to do. Let me go exercise. And so that would actually fit in perfectly with the self-management strategy.
What do they call that? Because they do that. A lot of times they'll say you have to journal and write down. There's a name for it though. When you're being mindfulness, is it mindfulness?
Mindfulness, yeah.
Mindfulness.
Yeah. I mean,
When you're eating, it's called mindful eating, I think.
Yeah.
Why are you eating? You have to answer all these questions.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that goes into subconsciously you're engaged in that behavior, you're getting some reinforcement out of it. So behavior analysts would be all over that, absolutely. They would just, wouldn't call it mindfulness, they would say, you know, self-control strategy.
But if you're going for the why, then that's a psychology.
If you're, right, if you're looking at that, and like we talked about the, you know, psychological construct,
Yeah.
why, we don't deal with that. We just say you've engaged in that behavior and that's all we care about. So let's stop that behavior.
Let's stop it.
Yeah.
I don't remember if you said it or if Paul said it, but I remember him saying that, or one of you saying that, instead of like replacing, I guess, eating exercise right away, you would, like if you liked apple pies, and you would then go to like applesauce and then apples.
Yeah,
And
but
then, I forget what that's called.
that would honestly be very much like a shaping behavior.
Okay.
Yeah, where you're changing things slowly to get to the ideal, you know, whatever it may be. So
So what
maybe
would you
you,
say works better? Like just instead of eating because you're stressed out, exercising, or eating something healthier?
it all depends upon your client. You can't just say, this is a broad, general, this will work for everybody piece of things.
And this is a side note too, I haven't read up on it, but I've been told that there's some research going on now with different groups of people, genetically from different parts of the world as to how they go about assessing weight differences and weight difficulties. So is there a major genetic component involved in how people gain and lose weight depending on where their origins are from?
Yeah.
So, I don't know, it's just kind of interesting.
Well, maybe programs fail for that very reason, it's too general.
Yeah.
And so, because
Could be.
it's so individualized, for each
Makes sense.
person, maybe that's why. But then people like, I think places like Jenny Craig, they try, or Weight Watchers, they have like a one-on-one person where you could make it a little more individualized. It'd be interesting to see if their success rate is higher than other programs.
Well,
That would be a good marketing thing, is so we could say, hey, we have a 20% better rate at helping people compared to Weight Watchers.
Yeah.
and that piece, the individual coaching is probably in there to teach the self-control part of thing, of accurately,
And to shape
You know,
it.
yeah, and shape that behavior to accurately, you know, tact. Yes, I only ate one piece of chocolate cake versus admitting, yeah, I ate 2.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then I'm sure also there's a lot of positive reinforcement that goes in there. You know, that weight coach probably, you know, sits there and measures your weekly weight with you and says, hey, this great job at losing weight. I can see that relates to the fact that you only had 36 points or whatever they have of it. And pairing that, you know, building that intrinsic reinforcement of, yes, I accurately tacted this and, you know, kept to my regiment. Yes, I lost it.
So it could really be based on ABA principles, a lot of it, like if you
Yeah.
really looked at some of them.
Yeah, and it's partially based upon, but it's also partially behavior analysts say this is why it works, and they draw out the principles to say this is why these programs are successful. And now that we know that that works, let's adapt it to other situations.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So. So we kind of going through this already. So why does self-monitoring work? And we talked a little bit about how it could be, you know, that self-reinforcement of, you know, hooray, I noticed that by keeping this, I've lost, you know, 2 pounds, whatever it may be. It could also be some negative reinforcement, is that, you know, you're no longer feeling that guilt of I've engaged in, you know, 15 cigarettes. I'm only engaged in, you know, 5 cigarettes. So, you know, I'm sticking to my regimen. I don't feel like I'm abusing myself, or someone's gonna come in and yell at me for smoking 6 packs a day, whatever it may be. So, and then this is where they really talk about, Malat talks a lot about, you know, is the self-monitoring just rule-governed behavior, those contingencies in place, or is it actually affecting the principal behavior? So, yeah, so you can discuss if you want, put on discussion board if you want to. Cool.
We're good.
That's fine. All right. So that concludes tonight's little lecture. Wow, we went through that much quicker than I thought.
And by the way, you look great in brown.
I know. See, you guys have affected me subconsciously. I think this is like the 3rd week in a row I've had brown.